Welcome to the Compliance Experts podcast, hosted by Vartan Consultancy. Miles Vartan and his guests, as experts in compliance and risk management, will guide you carefully and with clarity through the many sectors of compliance like health and safety, ISO and operator licenses, and the complexity of customs regulations. They'll also be talking about the latest legislation, global trade news, and the hot topics as they happen.
Hello, good morning everybody, and welcome to this recording of the Compliance Experts. Today I am delighted to be joined by Dr Nigel Davies, who is Director of Technical and Sustainability at Muntons in Stowmarket. For those who don't know of Muntons, they are many things. I think Nigel will tell us all about it in a second, but a big malt producer and brewing ingredients producer in Stowmarket in Suffolk. And what we want to talk to Nigel about and get his views on today is in line with the COP conference in Scotland, and with increasing number of companies who we deal with asking for suppliers to their sustainability criteria. We understand, and we'll learn more soon about how Muntons do that. So Nigel, good morning. How are you?
Good morning. I'm well, thank you. I've been quite enthused, I think, by some of the things I've heard at COP26. You know, I try and avoid the politics and look at what they're actually going to do. And I think it's going to be very interesting what UK companies do. Now we've all got to write this carbon plan for 2023.
Yes.
That's going to be a challenge for quite a few, I think. I think for Muntons, as you mentioned, we've had quite a big presence in this area. So I think it's almost a bit like shuffling a few pieces of paper for us, because we've had this carbon plan written for many, many years. So we sort of know where we're going. But good move, I think, to encourage people to do it. I think getting people to write down what they're actually going to do, as opposed to what they think they might like to do, is going to be that's going to be the challenge.
So Nigel, just explain to us why Muntons went down this path those many years ago in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, we're primarily a UK-based manufacturer. We make malt and malted ingredients. So we've got bases out of East Anglia and out of Yorkshire. We do have a factory also in Thailand making dried malt extract over there as well. All of those factories, since we've had them, we've been very much focused on energy saving. I think that's really what sustainability used to be called, probably if you went back 25 years. Word didn't exist, probably. I mean, it did, but nobody was using it. So we'd had, because of the size of business that we are, we'd had a thing called a climate change agreement in place since about 2000. Essentially, if you had a certain combustion activity on your plants, you had to have this climate change agreement in. But if you hit the targets for kilowatts hours used per tonne of product that the government set you got a pretty hefty exemption on the levy. So the climate change levy was there. You know, it was between 65 and 80% of the levy you didn't have to pay if you hit your target. So there was real financial incentive, wasn't there, to do that. So We'd done that. We'd done better than that, actually, for a number of years. Our target was 12% of energy saved. We were at 18 at that time, so well in excess of the savings we'd had to make. But I remember at the time, it was, if you went back to about 2010, there was the rise of a thing called the science-based targets coming out of the Paris Agreement, saying, well, it's all right, business saving kilowatt hours per tonne, but effectively what that meant was that business could double its size, still, and if it was efficient, still be the same kilowatt hours per tonne, but actually still be putting more emissions out into the atmosphere. So it wasn't the best of metrics. And so therefore the European taxation scheme introduced a cap on carbon emissions, which was much more difficult for manufacturers, or any company for that matter, to comply with, but was the right thing to do. So looking at that and knowing that the UK standard was likely to follow that, in fact, it's only just followed it as we came out of Europe, it's only just followed that emission standard. I thought, okay, well, what are we going to do in terms of total emissions? Because that needs different technology. So the Science Based Target Organisation had looked at all organisations across the globe, decided how much they needed to decarbonise by, so that their impact on the climate was not going to contribute to more than a 2 degree C rise, and now it's a 1.5 degree C rise. Now, that was pretty frightening when you looked at it. You looked at manufacturing. Manufacturing was anywhere between 60 and 80% bear in mind we're doing well at 18. I'm suddenly thinking, whoa, that is a totally different standard to be going for. I have to say, if you go back to the early 2000s when we were looking at some of this stuff, there were no customers asking for it. It was largely driven by myself and former MD, Alan Rydell. We used to sometimes sit there when we were sort of making our way up to the company thinking, if ever we were in charge, we'd like to do this. And then we came to have positions on the board.
You found yourself in charge.
Yeah, we said, so what are we going to do about it? So Alan and myself said, well, we think that we should be going to be the lowest carbon malt producer in the world. And then I said, Alan, we don't know how to measure carbon. So he said, you can do that. So I then said, well, okay, I need to work out how to measure carbon footprint. So there was no calculator. I've developed about 4 carbon calculators now over the years and developed the world's first one for malting barley. The point was that because there was this massive difference in the science-based target, I needed to see where in the supply chain I needed to work to make those big reductions, which would get us to, to the 60, 70% saving. In fact, just backtracking the other way, the science-based target for Muntons was set at 45% for our on-site emissions from 2010 levels, because they recognized that we'd done such a lot in the 15, 20 years before that, which other manufacturers hadn't done. So if you like, they recognized that we'd already done a lot, so shouldn't be penalized and trying to offset the slowness of other manufacturers. So they set us a target, 45% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, which effectively was gas and electricity use on site from 2010. You have to hit that target within 15 years. Muntons has found a way of actually not just hitting that target, but going well beyond that even.
I think you're at 24% per tonne.
Yeah, but we're about,
now, yeah.
Well done. Yeah, you've done your homework on that. Good. But we're actually about to just jump to nearly 60%.
Wow.
And that's because we've changed the fuels that we use for heating at Bridlington. We've got a bioenergy centre at Stowmarket, which I'm delighted has won 2 awards. It won the Food and Drink Federation Sustainability Leadership Award, and it's just won the Baking Industry Association Innovation Award.
Nigel, could I come back to the biomass in a second?
Yes, absolutely.
And sorry to interrupt, especially as you were on a bit of a charge there. So,
it's okay.
So we are a small business. Vartan Consultancy, a small business. There's 7 of us in the company, and I saw a webinar about reduction of carbon footprints and things, and I decided to ask everybody, all 7 of us, as to what would you like to see in terms of real actions happening? And I got some interest. Everybody replied to my email to the start, which was fantastic.
It is.
I asked them for 3 objectives, and pretty much there were some interesting ones, but there was a uniform, almost desire to see. People were fed up with talk about it and wanting to see real action. Okay. Now, for some time, we as a business have been aligned. We work with the Suffolk Chamber of Commerce, who are working with EDF at Sizewell.
Mm-hmm.
And EDF want Sizewell C to become, they want Leiston to become the first net zero town in Britain. And they're making the environment a top line requirement if you're a supplier and you're thinking about wanting to join the supply chain. So they're wanting you to demonstrate your ability not only to have a plan, but how your company is supporting improvement in the environmental sphere, coming up with objective ways of proving this. And it would seem to me that Muntons are a bit of an exemplar. And the great thing is you're in Suffolk as well. So the biomass, the biomass project you have, tell us a little bit about that.
I think it's very important. Thank you for picking up on that. The exemplar thing, I think, is something I'm very keen on. I always say, you can't be a leader unless people follow you, which is a bit obvious. But what that means is you need to share your experiences of how it's maybe not quite as difficult as people think, which is why I like the fact that if you win awards for things, it draws people's attention to it. So I was asked a few years back when I was discussing the very first biomass plant we had we were considering then at Bridlington. Well, how would I describe my approach to sustainability? And I said it has to be practical. I'm not interested in it at all in greenwash. It has to be practical, and it has to be based on project work. And that's stuck. That idea of Munton's tagline of practical sustainability is stuck, and I love it because That's what we were looking at. So the biomass we found out that there's a lot of wood around the country that comes from forestry operations. The wood's chipped and left on the forest floor because it's got no other productive use. So it maybe will sit there for 30, 40 years and emit, rot and emit a certain amount of CO2. There was so much of it available that, within about sort of 75 miles of our malting plant in Bridlington, that we could take that instead of using natural gas in the kilns that kiln the malt, make that lovely flavour that we can enjoy in all sorts of products. We could take that and make heat out of it and emit the same amount of CO2. That's why they called it renewable. So
I see.
But the emissions, therefore, are 90% less. So we put that in at Bridlington, and we would have actually liked to have co-generated electricity with it at the same time. The problem is, had we generated electricity, we couldn't get it out into the national network. The project itself to put the biomass in was about £6 million, £6.5 million. The local authorities were saying, if you want to put electricity out to us, it's going to cost you £12 million. So it was going to. We thought, why should we be paying to repair the national electricity network? So we didn't do it. And anyway, that was still a good project. 90% emissions reductions. That's what got us to the 24% overall. So we decided we needed to do the same thing down at Stowmarket. Did the checks around here to make sure we'd still got the fuel that was available. But because the Stowmarket plant also has a brewery on it, which makes malt extract, we don't ferment it. But if we did choose to ferment, we'd be as big as some of the small national brewers, but we don't. We make malt extract. Because of those operations are much bigger, we could generate electricity on our site because we could use all of it ourselves. And that was the difference. We didn't need to connect up to the grid. So it's the same sort of system at Stowmarket, the one that's just won the award. We have now. We needed to use some of the gas that we got on site for other things we wanted to expand into because production's going really well, but there wasn't enough gas. So we've taken some of that gas demand away by putting the biomass heating in, and that will generate heat and steam for all the operations on site. Again, that has 90% emissions reductions. However, some of that gas can then be used, that we've now got spare, if you like, can be used to power a CHP engine, which generates electricity. And using gas to do it, as opposed to using the grid electricity, drops your carbon footprint of electricity by around about 20%.
Wow.
So it's great. So we're now effectively self-sufficient for electricity, and we provide all of our heat through the biomass. Obviously, we're still connected to the grid, because these bits of kit, they do need to come down for maintenance every now and again. But that's, and then you add on to that the fact that back in 2014, we managed to put in a piece of plant, the anaerobic digestion plant, which took the waste water off the malt extract processes, and used anaerobic bugs to generate methane as it cleaned it up so that it could be discharged. And we made 16% of site electricity now with that. And the good thing is that it doesn't even generate a waste because the product that comes off it is not a waste. It's a fertilizer that goes back to land which grows malting barley on.
So complete circular. What is the capacity? I'm intrigued about the anaerobic digestion because I worked with a company called Bioenergy at one stage who built almost a prototype anaerobic digestion plant at Adnams over at Raiden.
Oh, yeah.
So all the brewing waste went into it, and they went and collected food waste from schools. All came round to the anaerobic digestion plant at Raiden, and there was a link to the national grid there.
Yes, I remember that. They got some. Adams got some grant money. I remember being in when they were talking about it. I think they were the first AD plant to inject gas directly to the gas grid, rather than. So that was quite exciting.
Okay, it was gas. Yeah.
But I mean, that was good,
At Sizewell, they're going to have a peak if the project goes ahead. You're going to have 7,000 people eating, sleeping, and working on site, pretty much. So there's going to be quite a lot of food waste there, and they're looking at all sorts of ways of. They want all the vehicles to be moving around on hydrogen gas. So they're going to take looking at 60% of the heat coming out of the power station is water. So you can put that through an electrolyzer. I'm saying all these words, and especially as you're a doctor, I'm beginning to worry about my credibility here. But I didn't do very well.
Yeah.
I didn't do very well in physics at school either. But
You're doing all right. You can't see me on this call, but I'm smiling because I was talking about this very subject yesterday about
really?
how So you're spot on, because the one of the ways that they're going to decarbonize the electricity industry is to power it by hydrogen. But there's a big debate at the minute as to how you make that hydrogen. And although you may or you may not like nuclear power stations, but park that discussion. It's a different subject altogether. You're dead right that they've got all this waste heat, and the waste heat is a very clean way of generating hydrogen. So it's a really good example of looking for a cleaner solution. So yeah, they will generate hydrogen that way, and if they can power their fleet on it, they may even do some local heating with it. I think there's a lot more.
I will. I'm more than likely will be introducing you to people at EDF, because I think they'd be delighted to hear from you, and especially some of the messages which you're putting out in terms of the benefit that it will help them explain the benefit of their project. So, in terms of individuals who work at Muntons in Bridlington and in Stowmarket, Nigel, how easy was it to get them engaged? I mean, I think the answer is going to be relatively easy, but how easy was it to get them fully engaged in this mission, to give it the support? Did it really help in terms of employer engagement?
Yeah, it definitely has. We noticed that it's a feature when people ask to come and work with us, that one of the things that attracts them is the fact that we're a credible organisation when it comes to sustainability. We don't just talk about it. So that's useful. I mean, clearly people on site they will engage with the initiatives. They'll ask the tough questions, and I'm delighted that they will. Things like, well, how important is it? Because if Muntons stopped producing tomorrow, all this good work wouldn't make any difference to the planet, would it? That's a great question, because what my answer to that is, no, you're dead right, it wouldn't. So we're not big enough to one company to impact the planet. However, by the sort of thing that we're just doing now, talking about it openly, sharing our experience across the supply chain, then you get people enthused about this. So in the same way that people have got enthusiastic and they've looked at water saving, they've looked at biodiversity, they've developed a little user group on site and integrated sustainable thinking into the way they do their general business, get that message out more widely in the supply chain, and you have a much, much bigger influence. And that's where I think it's important. Get people to be ambassadors for the things that we're doing. And again, not as I've been criticised sometimes going out to some of these conferences. They're saying, "Oh, you're dumbing it down. You're making it too easy for people." I'm saying, no, I'm demystifying it, and that's been picked up by a few journalists. If you tell people things are complex, and if you tell them it's really hard to do, guess what? They're going to believe that, and they're probably going to think it's doom and gloom. I don't like to work like that. I prefer to tell people, honestly, where some of the uncertainty is, but then to get people to work on what you can actually change. Because, whilst we may be waiting for new technology to really get us to carbon neutrality, I don't think we're never going to be carbon zero. It's a word I hate, carbon zero, because carbon zero means you've emitted no emissions anywhere in your supply chain. Well, that's never going to be the case. However, the carbon neutrality is the bit that I like to focus on when I'm talking internally, because if you've got emissions somewhere and you're the most efficient you possibly can be, you then need to get to carbon neutrality by finding something else that you can do that will reduce your emissions. That's offsetting, of course. I am completely against offsetting that takes somebody else's good work just to balance your carbon budget.
Yes, yeah.
That's terrible. Shouldn't be done. Go and buy a forest that somebody else has planted somewhere else. Well, it might be a nice idea, but really, there are much better things that you can do. So by talking about this across our staff and across our supply chain, we've actually got to the point now where our farmer group is not only engaged, which they were worried about initially, but they're actually now producing not even carbon neutral, but carbon negative malting barley. So that message, talking about a message with the team at Muntons and with our suppliers and with our customers has just opened their minds a little bit, I think, to saying, well, maybe we should listen a little bit more to this stuff we think is rubbish and have a go with it.
Well, I'm just thinking about, I'm sitting there on the board of Muntons, and Dr. Davis comes in and says, we need to spend this amount of money to do X. And I'm going, well, how? I've got a price, I need to sell my product at. But I think I'm without going down that route, down that avenue, I think I'm anticipating that the consumer base is becoming so aware now of the need to protect the environment and to get to this 1.5 degrees target that I don't think anybody's going to go crazy and pay huge increases in prices, but there's a justification for your price tag. Basically, it's going to be, if I'm looking at your flour compared to somebody else's flour or baking ingredient, then I'm going to be turning the packet and looking for environmental credentials, aren't I? Increasingly, I'm going to be doing this.
Yes, you will. The consumer's not going to pay for it. I think that's the reality, though. I think it would be nice to think that they would. Within Muntons, we always try and, when we're sitting at the board, I try and use it as either we need to do this because there's going to be regulation coming in which is going to tax us, therefore cost us more, so we can avoid that. The other one, I think, is that, well, if we don't do it, our brand won't be positioned in a way that people want to buy from us in the future, so it's brand protection. We've also had a number of our customers say to us that when the price is equal between you and your competitors, we will choose you because you've got a great sustainability agenda. Now, that is good, but I think it's going to become just something which gets you to the door in a few years' time. The fact, if you're not sustainable, we won't even buy from you. Quite whether people understand what sustainable means, I don't know. But if you look, I was at the launch this week of the UK Food Valley in Lincoln, and one of the comments that I made there, because people asked a very similar question, do you think people will pay for this? The surveys that have been carried out over about a 10-year period now have all come up with the same thing, really. They've looked at things like sort of things that they would expect the consumer to pay for, things like fair trade, organic, that sort of thing, sustainability. People will say to you, when you say, do you prefer something that's fair trade or organic or environmentally sustainable, about 2/3 of people polled will tell you, yes, they absolutely value those, but it only translates into about a 10% buying decision, because sustainability, fair trade, all those things come down about number 7 or 8 on the customer's preference. Price and quality have been number 1 and 2 for many years, 10 to 15 years in polls. So what businesses need to do with their sustainability agenda is to work out how they can do that in the background, probably tell stories to the customer about what they're doing. And I say tell stories not in terms of lying, I mean tell a good story, a genuine story to the customer about their sustainability agenda. No point, I think, putting sustainability metrics on the packet, because there's too many on there already, salt, sugar, fat, and all the rest of it. It's too confusing. I think you need to tell that good story about your company separately, get people to understand that you're a company that values sustainability and ethics and will do it the right way. But then you drive your agenda internally to reduce cost so that people can choose your product because it's the right price and it's sustainable.
And when you look at your strapline, delivering enjoyment to people's lives by creating more of what they love, it's very relevant, isn't it?
Well, I think so. I mean, it's again, where would you like to work? I'd like to work for a company that has got a track record of sustainability, quality, nutrition, or would you like to work for one where you know full well that if you just, if you look behind the rhetoric that they're not really doing it? Well, I know which one I'd like to work for, and I think we all know some of those companies that maybe are just telling something publicly, but you look behind there and you ask them what they're actually doing. Maybe they're not doing as much as they should be.
Exactly. I mean, I'm thinking of trying to think of a tough Jeremy Paxman question here, but I think I'm probably going to need to aim that question at people who don't do this. So companies who we're a compliance business. We speak to people about health and safety and adhering to standards and how we can help and everything like this. And we do sometimes meet brick walls, people are not responsive, but there's so much in the press now about how Sir David Attenborough saying this is our last chance, and so many, you've got small island population representatives arriving in Glasgow saying we're not careful, we will lose the place we live because of the rise in water levels. So it's going to be coming home to people very hard soon, isn't it? Unless positive actions happen. So.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, it's one of the things that I've been at Muntons for 24 years now. But last year I decided I would start preparing for a different type of life, and I set up my own consultancy for 2 days a week, and I called it Malt Doctor, which you can well imagine where that name came from. The business I'm in, as a Malt Doctor Limited, and a lot of that I've been just sitting with companies, just helping them understand the terminology and working out how they can actually avoid this greenwash and do practical things. But, a lot of it is still engaging with the boards there, because a lot of the chief executives I find of the clients I've got are still sitting there thinking that this is all about tree hugging. And they don't get it. They don't see that it's a good strategic pillar for business. So I help them to see that, yes, if you're putting something sustainable in, a new project or something, it may well be that you're not going to get your 3-year payback. You might have to stretch it to 6, 7, maybe even 8 years payback for some of these sustainability initiatives. But 2 things. One, you've now got to do it because there's a risk to your business if you don't comply. You'll be running up against legislative issues with the government. But 2, it is about de-risking your business from the impact of climate change. So we know that there are things happening in the climate, and I always make sure that I distance it from a discussion about climate change, because there are still too many people that I would say hide behind that as, we're not certain about it, so let's pretend it's all rubbish and therefore we don't need to do anything. Forget that. Park that. It's about business risk. It's about, can we do things now which reduce our emissions, which de-risk us from the supply, being reliant on electricity and gas supply from the national networks. Therefore, we have less risk of our business stopping. We are going to reduce our operational costs. Yes, we're going to have to put our hand in our pocket. But this is all about business risk when I talk to boards. And then I find they get it. However, when you're talking to the staff, they're probably less engaged by that discussion, and they want to know about projects and how much emissions, and when you've saved those emissions, how many cars is that like that you've taken off the road. Mm-hmm. And that's fine. You can have those two discussions. But I find it really, really exciting to get engaged. I've engaged with a few businesses sort of around Suffolk and extended into Cambridgeshire. But even, surprisingly, one thing that surprised me, I'm only a tiny consultancy, even smaller than you, because there's just me. But I've got, as one of my clients, the biggest brewer in the world. I probably shouldn't tell you who it is, but you wouldn't take much guessing. But you think, how the heck do they need a one-man band, if you like?
You're a one-man band, and you're working with already large stakeholders in this game. I suspect you're going to find that your 2 days a week is going to be put under immense pressure in terms of the hours that you think it's available. So we're going to have to bring this to a close now. But thank you very much for that inspirational input. And I think we're all going to go away. All the listeners to this podcast will go away with hammering down the doors of their directors at the end of the corridor and saying, listen to this podcast. And it's not just me spouting off about what I think we should be doing, but here's a local example of how good practice is being of great benefit to the environment. So
absolutely.
I'd like to thank you very much for your time, especially in what has already been a busy day for you. So
I'm delighted. I think it's great to share that experience. I mean, I think we're lucky that we developed it at Muntons. We've got we've got a board there that's completely committed to that. And I think, again, if you've got people on other boards are listening to this and thinking, well, is this just Nigel saying it? Well, it's not. You can talk to any of our directors, and I would encourage you to do that. Talk to the board at Muntons and be enthused.
Thank you, Nigel. So thank you, everybody, for listening to our podcast today. As we always say, if you've got any subjects you'd like us to discuss, we'd be all too pleased to speak to you. And we look forward to speaking to you on our next episode. This will be published on all the usual channels, and we'll be sticking it out big time on social media to make sure that everybody gets to hear this message. So many thanks, and enjoy your day. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Compliance Experts podcast. We highly value your input and welcome any questions, thoughts or challenges for us to tackle in forthcoming episodes. Vartan Consultancy pride themselves in helping customers manage risk and subsequently helping them improve their overall company performance. To speak to Miles and his team, visit vartanconsultancy.com. This podcast is produced and managed by podtalk.co.uk and is the copyright of Vartan Consultancy. This podcast is created for entertainment purposes only. Views and opinions are that of Vartan Consultancy and their guests. Information recorded in this episode was deemed correct at the time of recording. However, we advise you to always check with Vartan Consultancy for up-to-date information and legislation.